Hey, I'm Karandi, and today I want to discuss the strange case of Madoka Magica. There's been a lot written and said about Madoka Magica since it came out in 2011. For the most part, people have viewed this series as a critique of the magical girls series in general, or at the very least a subversive entry into the genre of magical girls, and certainly the show can be viewed in that manner. Since it came out, there have been countless other dark magical girl stories, and almost universally people have either compared them unfavourably to Madoka Magica, or just not felt the same emotional punch that Madoka delivered. While it isn't really fair to dislike a series like Magical Girl Raising Project because it isn't Madoka, the comparison from the start was pretty much set in stone, and unfortunately the opening episodes of that series didn't have anywhere near the visual or emotional impact needed to sway away from an already fairly jaded audience. From reading the reviews, those who stuck with it mostly felt it was a rewarding watch, but many, including myself, abandoned ship early on. The more recent Magical Girl Spec Op Asuka also ended up compared, usually unfavourably, with dark magical girl stories that came before it, although at least it had some vague military trappings to distinguish itself, and at times it managed to focus on the impact of trauma on a character, although ultimately it left the audience dissatisfied with its take on this. What I find particularly interesting about Madoka, more so than any comparison I might make to shows that have come after it, is that it is consistently called a magical girl show. What actually sets Madoka Magica apart from mostly every other magical girl show that I've watched, and every satire of the genre, is that Madoka isn't a magical girl. This is an origin story for a legend that will be told by magical girls in the world that is created in the final episode of Madoka, but it isn't actually a story about a magical girl. If we make the obvious comparison to other magical girl shows that came before Madoka, such as Sailor Moon, we can immediately see the key differences. Episode 1 of both shows starts with a flashback or dream sequence to some major conflict, and then our protagonist wakes up in the very mundane and ordinary world before going about their morning business. These openings are almost perfectly synchronized, and they really aren't the only shows that do this. Cardcaptor has pretty much the same opening sequence, as do dozens of other shows in this genre. So, does that prove that Madoka is actually following along the path of a standard magical girl show? Not really, but what are the key differences? By the end of episode 1 of Sailor Moon, Serena has met Luna, been given her brooch, and transformed into Sailor Moon and defeated her first villain with some help and support from Tuxedo Mask. Sakura, from Cardcaptor, has released the Cloud cards and partnered up with Kuro to hunt down the rest of the cards. If we look at Shugo Kara, Amu has hatched her first egg and had her first character change. In all of these shows, by the end of episode 1, we know our protagonist is special and can use special powers. She's used them already and already had her first encounter with whatever the antagonist of the show is going to be. So, what about episode 1 of Madoka? Yes, there are magical girls, and Kyuubi has appeared in all his evil cuteness. Madoka has not become a magical girl. Neither has Saya at this point. Madoka remains an observer of the magic in the world. And this remains true for Madoka until the very end of the series. The story explores the agony of whether or not to take that final step from the safe and normal world into the world of magical girls, where you can have your wish granted, but the cost it comes with is enormous and mostly not spelled out in the contract. To go back to Sailor Moon, this would be like having the entire story told from the perspective of Molly. She watched her friends transform, doesn't know the whole story but knows something is going on. She wants to help, but ends up fretting and hoping from the sidelines. That's Madoka's role through the majority of the story. The only difference between Madoka and Molly is that Madoka actually has the chance to change her destiny. This is where Madoka actually does become a critique of the magical girl genre. In most of these stories, we're seeing it from the insider's point of view. And more importantly, the initial transformation from ordinary to magical is over in an instant. While the character might later have doubts or second guess themselves, they were already transformed and have power, so to not use it would be a tragedy. Their path is set and more or less locked in stone, and any protest they may verbally make or threats to quit are more or less futile, and the audience knows it. A truly subversive magical girl series might have had a member of the team actually quit for real, and not have some epiphany and come back. That would actually really mess with audience expectations to have them genuinely sit on the sidelines and let the tragedy unfold when they actually do have the power to stop it and choose not to act. Madoka shows us the story almost entirely from the outsider's point of view. Madoka is the outsider. While initially Saya is also an outsider, she jumps into the world of magical girls and becomes yet another case study for Madoka in the tragedy that is unfolding. This extended belaboring of the choice Magical Girls face finally makes the audience face up to all those characters saving the world at risk of life and limb, and makes the audience really understand what is sitting beneath all those pretty costumes and love hearts. Madoka isn't about tearing down the magical girl genre, it's about rethinking the reality faced by the characters and putting a new voice into the forefront of people's minds. That Madoka will eventually choose to step into the world of magical girls, knowing exactly what her decision will lead to and finding a way to use that in her favour, is still a remarkable way to end the show. It combines her transformation, the final battle, and transition into legend all into one sequence. She becomes a magical girl and uses that to save those she has come to treasure, creating an entirely new reality where she exists only as a dream or memory in the lives of those she touched. We never get to see Madoka in her own reality as a magical girl in the original series because she never existed as one in the time sequence we follow. We only see her as a magical girl in flashbacks to other realities and in dreams. For me, Madoka Magica will always be kind of special. There's certainly issues with the narrative in places, and some of the characters aren't as well developed as you would like, but it has done its job at reframing what magical girls are, and it has done it in a way that doesn't take away from the tiara-wearing girls before it. Ultimately, this is why the so-called imitators that have come after it have fallen short, and I know some of them aren't actually trying to imitate Madoka, but they feel like the writer just grabbed the idea of a dark magical girl story because Madoka did well without understanding that it wasn't the shock deaths and darkness that held this story up. What holds Madoka up is an understanding of what had been missing from all those magical girl stories before, and Madoka neatly filled that gap. This is an origin of a magical girl. It's the agony they face as they leave behind what they know and go to face a monstrous danger. It is also the end of a magical girl, as she gives up her life and entire being to save the world with no do-over or last-minute reprieve or rebirth. That is why simply calling the series a critique or a subversive magical girl story doesn't really begin to do it justice. Incidentally, this week while I've not been feeling so well, I've rewatched Madoka, and now I'm really wanting to do a post on Homura, so hopefully I will write that soon. Thanks for listening, this has been Karandi, and remember you can check out hundreds of more posts on the blog, 100wordAnime.blog. See ya!